Well, my name is Valerie Robertson, and I've lived in Wilmington since 1994, and I enjoy making quilts and quilt art based on some of the quilting techniques that I've learned through the years and based on the quilting heritage from my family in the Ozarks of Missouri. So thank you to Gwenifar. I have some of my pieces on display in Old Books on Front Street, and I wanted to show you some of the different kinds of quilting techniques and quilts in this show. It makes it a little more fun to look at if you know what's behind some of them.
Okay.
So there are three basic categories of quilting technique, and I'm a little unusual in that I do some of all of them. I'm also unusual in that I do hand quilting as well as machine quilting, just suiting the technique to whatever I'm trying to do. So the three kinds of quilting are pieced quilts, applique quilts, and whole cloth quilts. A pieced quilt, like this little pineapple, is one where you take a lot of little pieces of fabric and sew them together in order to make a quilt top. An applique quilt would be one where you take a big sheet of fabric and you applique or apply pieces on top, often to make a picture or a scene of some sort, or maybe a floral motif. That's applique. And then there are some quilts that are made with no pattern at all until you add the quilting stitch. So what makes something a quilt? It's quilted. If you have a quilt top and then some fluffy stuff in the middle and then a fabric base on the back, the quilting stitch, the thing that holds that sandwich together with sewing stitches, is called quilting, and that's what makes a quilt a quilt. In fact, quilters always say it's not a quilt till it's quilted, because a number of us are in the habit of making tops and then instead of quilting them you just start another top. Anyway, I wanted to show you some pieced quilts first, and then we'll see some samples of some other things. I have all three techniques represented in this show, mostly pieced and whole cloth pieces. So this is a miniature version of a very traditional block called a pineapple. Normally you would make this in a 10 or 12 inch block, but I've made it in a little 3-inch block and framed it just to honor the tradition of these little blocks. What happens when you take one block and sew it to another block just like it is that you get a secondary pattern. So if you look at this little quilted miniature piece, that's one single block, but then if you add it to more, you get a secondary pattern. You get diagonal movement, you get a lot more going on when you start adding blocks to each other. And quilters love to play with the geometry of those kinds of patterns. You'll see some quilts that are the same block repeated, just as we see here, and you see others where you have two different kinds of blocks or more that alternate, and that'll end a completely different pattern. So I'd like to move on to a different form of this, just to show you a variation.